What happens when a king's heart betrays his crown? King Theodore ruled with absolute power for 20 years, married to Queen Isabel in a union that secured 2 kingdoms. But when a mysterious slave girl arrived at court, everything changed. His love for her became so consuming, so obvious to everyone, that it threatened to tear apart not just his marriage, but his entire realm. The queen knew. The court whispered. The kingdom watched. But what happened when the truth about this slave girl was finally revealed will shock you to your core. If you love stories of forbidden passion, royal scandals, and plot twists that change everything, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because we bring you the most incredible medieval tales every day. This is a story about a love so powerful it could destroy kingdoms, a secret so dangerous it was buried for decades, and a revelation so stunning that it will make you question everything you think you know about royal bloodlines and destiny. Stay until the end, because what the slave girl reveals about her true identity will leave you speechless and change the fate of an entire dynasty. The autumn rain drummed relentlessly against the stained glass windows of Thornwick Castle as King Theodore sat in his private study, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he held a letter that would change everything. At 52, he had ruled the kingdom of Valdoria for 20 years with wisdom and strength, his marriage to Queen Isabel serving as the cornerstone of a powerful alliance between 2 great houses. But now, staring at the parchment before him, he felt his carefully constructed world beginning to crumble like ancient stone. The letter bore the seal of a distant monastery, and its contents spoke of a woman who had died in their care after living as a nun for over 2 decades. Sister Maria Celestine, the letter informed him, had passed peacefully in her sleep, but not before confessing a secret that the abbess felt compelled to share with the crown. The dying woman had revealed that she was not, as everyone believed, a commoner who had found refuge in religious life. She was Lady Maria de Valencia, daughter of a duke who had been branded a traitor and executed when Theodore was still a young prince. More shocking still was her final confession. Before taking holy vows, she had given birth to a daughter fathered by the then Prince Theodore himself during a brief but passionate affair that had occurred just before his arranged marriage to Queen Isabel. The child, the letter revealed, had been hidden away to protect both the girl's life and the future king's reputation. But now, with Sister Maria's death, the secret threatened to emerge from the shadows where it had been carefully concealed for 23 years. King Theodore's mind raced as memories flooded back. Memories of a beautiful young woman with dark eyes and a laugh like silver bells, memories of stolen moments in hidden alcoves, memories of a love so intense it had nearly convinced him to defy his father and break his betrothal. He had forced himself to forget Maria when duty demanded he marry Queen Isabel, but now her ghost was reaching out from beyond the grave to shatter his peace. The sound of footsteps in the corridor outside his study drew him back to the present. Queen Isabel's voice could be heard giving instructions to the servants, her tone carrying the authority and efficiency that had made her such an effective partner in ruling their kingdom. She had borne him 3 legitimate sons, managed the royal household with skill, and never given him cause to doubt her loyalty or competence. Yet their marriage, while successful politically, had never rekindled the fire he had once felt for Maria. As if summoned by his troubled thoughts, the study door opened to admit a figure that made the king's heart stop. Serafina, the slave girl who had arrived at court 6 months ago, entered carrying fresh logs for the fireplace. She was perhaps 23 years old, with dark hair that caught the firelight and eyes that reminded him painfully of someone from his past. Her movements carried a natural grace that seemed inconsistent with her humble status, and there was something about her bearing that suggested noble breeding despite her circumstances. "Your Majesty," she said softly, her voice carrying a musical quality that sent shivers down his spine. "Shall I tend the fire?" The simple question was spoken with a refinement of speech that had puzzled him since her arrival. Most slaves and servants spoke in the rough dialect of the common people, but Serafina's words carried the cadence of someone educated in the ways of nobility. Theodore found himself unable to speak for a moment, studying her face in the flickering light. The resemblance was there, subtle but unmistakable, the curve of her cheek, the arch of her eyebrows, the way she held her head when she was concentrating. Features that could have been inherited from Maria, combined with others that might have come from his own bloodline. "Yes," he managed finally, his voice rougher than intended. "The fire has grown cold." As she knelt gracefully beside the hearth, he found himself wondering if fate had played the cruelest joke imaginable, bringing his own daughter to serve as a slave in his very court, unknown and unrecognized by either of them. The possibility was both thrilling and terrifying. If Serafina was indeed his child, then his growing feelings for her took on a completely different and far more complicated nature. The attraction he had been fighting, the pull he felt toward her that seemed to go beyond mere physical desire, suddenly made terrible sense. It wasn't romantic love he was feeling, but the deep, instinctive recognition of blood calling to blood, father to daughter across the years of separation and ignorance. Over the following weeks, King Theodore found himself studying Serafina with an intensity that did not go unnoticed by the court. His attention toward the slave girl had become the subject of whispered conversations among the nobles, who interpreted his interest in terms they understood all too well. Royal men had always taken lovers from among their servants, and many assumed the king was simply following that ancient tradition. But Theodore's scrutiny was driven by far more complex motives than mere desire. He began to notice details that had escaped his attention before. The way Serafina moved through the castle showed familiarity with noble customs that should have been foreign to someone of her supposed background. When she thought no one was watching, her posture straightened with unconscious dignity, and her hands moved with the delicate precision of someone trained in refined tasks rather than rough labor. Most telling of all, he had caught her more than once gazing at the portraits of his ancestors with an expression of intense recognition, as if she were seeing familiar faces rather than strangers. Queen Isabel had begun to notice her husband's preoccupation as well, though she misinterpreted its nature entirely. "Theodore," she said one evening as they sat together in their private chambers, "the servants are talking about your attention to that slave girl. The court is beginning to whisper that you've taken her as a mistress." Her voice carried disappointment rather than anger. Royal infidelity was common enough, but she had hoped her husband was above such base behavior. "It's not what you think, Isabel," Theodore replied, but he could not explain the truth without revealing secrets that might destroy far more than their marriage. How could he tell his wife that he suspected the slave girl they had unknowingly welcomed into their household might be his illegitimate daughter? How could he admit to the affair that had produced such a child without destroying the trust and respect that had sustained their partnership for 2 decades? "Then what is it?" Queen Isabel pressed, her intelligent blue eyes searching his face for answers. "You watch her with an intensity that goes beyond casual interest. You've arranged for her to serve in areas where you're most likely to encounter her. If you're not planning to bed her, then what explains this fascination?" Theodore felt trapped between impossible choices. Revealing his suspicions about Serafina's parentage would require admitting to his long-ago affair with Maria, potentially devastating his marriage and creating a succession crisis if his legitimacy came under question. But continuing to conceal the truth meant allowing his own daughter, if she was indeed his daughter, to remain in slavery, ignorant of her true heritage and the rights that should be hers by birth. "I believe she may be more than she appears," he said finally, choosing his words with careful precision. "There are circumstances that suggest her background may not be what we have assumed." It was as close to the truth as he dared come without revealing everything. Queen Isabel's expression shifted from suspicion to curiosity. "What kind of circumstances? Do you suspect she's a spy? A displaced noble seeking to infiltrate our court?" Her political mind immediately began calculating the potential threats and opportunities such a situation might present. "Something like that," Theodore agreed, grateful for her misinterpretation while hating himself for the deception. "I've been trying to determine her true origins before taking any action." The lie came easier than it should have, but he told himself it was necessary to protect everyone involved. Serafina from the dangerous truth, Isabel from painful revelations, and the kingdom from potential chaos. Meanwhile, Serafina herself remained unaware of the storm of speculation swirling around her presence at court. She performed her duties with quiet efficiency, grateful for the relative comfort of her position compared to the harsh conditions she had endured before arriving at Thornwick Castle. She had been sold into slavery as a child after her adoptive family could no longer afford to care for her, and the years since had been a blur of different masters and increasingly desperate circumstances. What she didn't understand was why she felt such a strange sense of belonging within the castle walls, why certain corridors and chambers felt familiar despite her having never seen them before. Sometimes she would catch herself humming melodies that seemed to come from nowhere, lullabies that felt like half-remembered dreams. And when she looked at King Theodore, she felt an inexplicable pull, a sense of connection that went far beyond the natural deference a slave should feel toward her master. The king's obvious attention frightened and confused her in equal measure. She had learned to be wary of noblemen who showed interest in female servants, knowing that such attention rarely led anywhere good for the women involved. Yet there was something different about the way Theodore looked at her, not with the predatory hunger she had learned to recognize and fear, but with a complex mixture of emotions she couldn't begin to interpret. The tension in the castle reached a breaking point 3 months after the letter from the monastery arrived, when Queen Isabel decided to take direct action regarding her husband's mysterious preoccupation. She had grown tired of watching Theodore's increasingly obvious fascination with the slave girl, and her political instincts told her that allowing the situation to continue unchecked could lead to scandal that might damage the crown's reputation and her own position as queen. "I want to speak with her," Queen Isabel announced one morning as she and Theodore broke their fast in their private dining chamber. "This Serafina who has captured so much of your attention. If she's truly some kind of displaced noble or potential threat, then I should evaluate her myself." Her tone brooked no argument, carrying the authority of a woman accustomed to being obeyed in matters concerning the royal household. Theodore felt his blood run cold at the suggestion. The idea of his wife interrogating the young woman who might be his daughter filled him with a combination of protective instincts and sheer terror. "That may not be wise, Isabel. If my suspicions are correct, confronting her directly could force her hand in ways that might prove dangerous to us all." His objection was weak, and he could see from his wife's expression that she found it unconvincing. "Theodore," Queen Isabel said firmly, rising from her chair with a fluid grace that had made her one of the most admired women at court, "I have supported you through 20 years of marriage, borne your children, and helped you rule this kingdom with wisdom and strength. But I will not stand by and watch you become obsessed with a slave girl while the court whispers about your infidelity and my humiliation." Her words carried the steel of genuine anger, and Theodore realized he had pushed his wife's patience to its absolute limit. "Very well," he conceded, knowing he had no choice but to agree. "But I ask that you be gentle in your questioning. Whatever her true background, she has clearly suffered much in her young life." His plea carried more emotion than he intended, and he saw Queen Isabel's eyes narrow with renewed suspicion. The confrontation was arranged for that very afternoon, in the Queen's private solar, where Serafina would be brought under the pretense of receiving new assignments for her duties. Theodore was not invited to attend, but he found himself pacing the corridors nearby, his anxiety growing with each passing minute. Everything he had worked to protect, his marriage, his kingdom's stability, his daughter's safety, hung in the balance of whatever conversation was taking place behind those closed doors. Inside the solar, Queen Isabel studied the young woman who had become the focus of so much speculation and concern. Serafina knelt respectfully before her queen, but even in that submissive position, there was something about her bearing that suggested she was accustomed to better treatment. Her hands, while calloused from labor, were long-fingered and elegant, and her speech patterns continued to reflect an education that seemed inconsistent with her supposed background. "Tell me about yourself, child," Queen Isabel said, her voice carrying the authority of absolute power, but tempered with a gentleness that surprised them both. "Where did you come from before arriving at our court? What family raised you, and how did you come to be enslaved?" The questions were direct but not unkind, spoken by a woman who understood that harsh interrogation would likely yield less useful information than patient inquiry. Serafina hesitated, clearly uncertain about how much truth she should reveal. "Your Majesty, I was raised by a family in the eastern provinces after my birth parents died when I was very young. When hard times came, they could no longer afford to keep me, and I was sold to pay their debts." Her story was simple and tragic, the kind of tale that was all too common in a world where survival often required impossible choices. "And your birth parents?" Queen Isabel pressed gently. "Do you remember anything about them?" Any details about your early childhood that might explain. She paused, searching for the right words. That might explain why you seem to possess refinements uncommon among those born to slavery. The question hung in the air between them, and Seraphina's eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. I have dreams sometimes, she admitted softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Dreams of a beautiful woman with dark hair who sang lullabies in a language I don't recognize. Dreams of a grand house with gardens full of roses. But I don't know if they're memories or simply fantasies born from wishful thinking. Queen Isabel felt something shift in her chest as she listened to the girl's words. There was a sincerity in Seraphina's manner that was difficult to fake, and the details she described seemed too specific to be mere imagination. More troubling still was the growing realization that the girl's age, her appearance, and the timeline of her story aligned perfectly with her husband's mysterious behavior and obvious emotional investment in her welfare. "Child," Queen Isabel said slowly, her political mind beginning to piece together possibilities that filled her with both dread and a strange kind of understanding. "I want you to tell me more about these dreams. Every detail you can remember, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant." As Seraphina began to recount her fragmentary memories and dreams with greater detail, Queen Isabel felt the pieces of a complex puzzle falling into place with devastating clarity. The girl spoke of half-remembered lullabies sung in the old tongue of Valencia, of gardens filled with white roses that had been the signature flower of the de Valencia family, of a woman who wore a distinctive ruby pendant that Isabel suddenly recalled seeing Maria wear during her brief time at court before her father's execution and her own disappearance. "This woman in your dreams," Queen Isabel said carefully, her voice steady despite the turmoil building in her chest. "Can you describe her pendant? The jewelry she wore?" She already knew what the answer would be, but she needed to hear it confirmed before she could accept the truth that was becoming increasingly undeniable. "It was a large ruby," Seraphina replied, her eyes growing distant as she reached for memories that seemed to hover just beyond conscious recollection. "Set in gold, with smaller stones around it that caught the light like stars. She would let me touch it sometimes, and it was always warm against my fingers." The description matched perfectly the heirloom pendant that had been passed down through generations of Valencia women, a piece of jewelry that Theodore would certainly remember from his time with Maria. Queen Isabel closed her eyes for a moment, processing the implications of what she was learning. If Seraphina was indeed the daughter of Maria de Valencia and King Theodore, then the girl kneeling before her was not just some random slave who had caught the king's fancy. She was his illegitimate daughter, a bastard princess with royal blood flowing through her veins, serving unknowingly in the very court where she should have been acknowledged and honored. The revelation explained everything: Theodore's mysterious fascination with the girl, his protective instincts, his inability to articulate why she commanded so much of his attention. He wasn't developing inappropriate feelings for a servant, he was experiencing the natural pull of blood recognition, the instinctive love of a father for his child, complicated by the fact that neither of them had been aware of their true relationship. "Seraphina," Queen Isabel said softly, using the girl's name for the first time since the conversation began, "I believe there are things about your heritage that you have never known, truths that have been hidden from you for your own protection but which can no longer remain secret." Her voice carried a mixture of compassion and resignation as she prepared to shatter the young woman's understanding of her own identity. "Your Majesty." Seraphina's voice carried confusion and a growing note of fear. She had survived by learning to read the moods and intentions of those in power over her, and she could sense that something momentous was building in the Queen's manner, something that would change her life in ways she couldn't begin to anticipate. "The woman in your dreams," Queen Isabel continued, her words chosen with careful precision, "was Lady Maria de Valencia, daughter of a duke who died accused of treason when you were very young. She was a woman of great beauty and intelligence who spent time at this very court before circumstances forced her to flee and seek sanctuary in religious life." Each word felt like a stone dropped into still water, creating ripples that would eventually reach every corner of their lives. Seraphina's eyes widened with shock and dawning understanding. Lady Maria, but that would mean... She couldn't complete the thought, couldn't voice the possibility that seemed too extraordinary to be real. The implications of noble birth, of being the daughter of someone important enough to have been known at court, seemed to hover just beyond her ability to accept. "It would mean," Queen Isabel said gently but firmly, "that you are not the common-born slave you have believed yourself to be. It would mean that noble blood flows in your veins, that you have rights and heritage that have been denied to you through circumstances beyond your control." She paused, gathering courage for the most difficult revelation yet to come. "And it would mean that your presence at this court is not the coincidence it appeared to be, but rather the working of fate bringing you home to where you belong." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the soft crackling of the fire in the hearth and the distant sounds of castle life continuing its normal rhythms beyond the solar's walls. Serafina sat motionless, her mind struggling to process the magnitude of what she was being told. Her entire understanding of herself, her place in the world, her very identity was being fundamentally altered with each word the queen spoke. "But your majesty," Serafina whispered finally, her voice trembling with emotion, "if what you say is true, then who was my father?" "Lady Maria was unmarried when she disappeared, was she not? The sisters at the monastery where I was told she died never spoke of her having a husband." The question carried an innocence that made Queen Isabel's heart ache, knowing as she did that the answer would complicate everything beyond measure. Queen Isabel felt the weight of the moment pressing down upon her like a physical force. She stood at a crossroads where every path led through treacherous territory. She could lie, could protect her husband and her marriage by creating some fiction about Maria having been secretly wed to a man who died young. Or she could tell the truth and watch as revelations about Theodore's past threatened to destroy the carefully constructed stability of their reign. The weight of decision hung heavy in the air as Queen Isabel studied the young woman before her, seeing now not just a slave girl but a living reminder of her husband's past, a daughter who had never known her father's love or protection. The truth was a double-edged sword that could cut both ways, destroying lives even as it restored stolen heritage and identity. But looking into Serafina's earnest face, filled with hope and desperate curiosity about her origins, Isabel realized that some truths were too important to remain buried, regardless of their consequences. "Your father," Queen Isabel said slowly, each word carefully weighed, "was a man of noble birth who loved your mother deeply but was bound by circumstances beyond his control. Their affair was brief but passionate, conducted in secret because political realities made any public acknowledgement of their relationship impossible." She paused, gathering strength for what came next. "Serafina, your father is King Theodore himself." The words fell into the room like thunderbolts, their impact reverberating through both women in profoundly different ways. Serafina felt her world tilting on its axis, everything she had believed about herself dissolving and reforming in the space of a heartbeat. The slave girl who had spent years accepting abuse and degradation because she believed herself worthless discovered in that moment that she carried royal blood, that she was the daughter of the most powerful man in the kingdom. The king. Serafina's voice was barely audible, shock rendering her almost speechless. "King Theodore is my father?" The concept seemed too enormous to grasp, too transformative to be real. She thought of every interaction she had had with the king since arriving at court, reinterpreting his attention and obvious interest through this new lens of understanding. "Yes," Queen Isabel confirmed, her own voice steady despite the emotional storm raging within her. "You are his illegitimate daughter, born of love but hidden away to protect both you and the crown from the political complications your existence would have created." She moved closer to where Serafina knelt, her manner shifting from interrogator to something approaching maternal comfort. "That explains so much," Serafina whispered, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks as memories and observations suddenly took on new meaning. "The way he looks at me, the attention he's shown. I thought—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the fear that had been growing within her about the king's intentions toward a mere slave girl. Queen Isabel understood immediately what the young woman had been thinking, and her heart ached with sympathy for the terror Serafina must have felt, believing herself to be the object of the king's inappropriate desires. "He was recognizing you," she said gently, "perhaps not consciously, but on some deeper level. Blood calls to blood, and a father's heart knows his child even when his mind does not understand what it's seeing." The revelation that had initially threatened to destroy Isabel's marriage now began to transform into something unexpectedly healing. The king's behavior, which had seemed like betrayal and infidelity, was revealed to be the natural response of a parent to his long-lost child. Rather than evidence of his faithlessness, it was proof of the deep familial bonds that transcended conscious knowledge and social barriers. "What happens now?" Serafina asked, her voice carrying a mixture of wonder and fear. "If I am truly the king's daughter, what does that mean for my life, for my place in the world?" The question was pragmatic despite her emotional state, showing the intelligence and political awareness that her royal heritage had given her, even if she had never understood its source. "Now," Queen Isabel said firmly, her decision crystallizing as she spoke, "you must be acknowledged for what you are. You cannot remain a slave when you are a princess, even an illegitimate one. Your father must be told what we have discovered, and arrangements must be made for your proper status and protection." The words came easier than she had expected, driven by a sense of justice that overrode her personal concerns about the complications this revelation would bring. "But Your Majesty," Serafina protested, "what about you? What about your marriage? Surely this knowledge will cause great pain and difficulty between you and the king." Her concern for the woman who had just given her back her identity was touching, showing a nobility of character that owed nothing to bloodline and everything to natural goodness of heart. Queen Isabel smiled sadly, recognizing in that moment why Theodore had fallen so completely in love with Maria de Valencia all those years ago. If Serafina had inherited even half her mother's compassion and grace along with her father's intelligence and strength, she was indeed a remarkable young woman who deserved far better than the life of slavery and abuse she had endured. "My marriage has survived 20 years of political challenges, personal struggles, and the normal complications of royal life," Isabel replied with quiet dignity. "It will survive this revelation as well, perhaps even be strengthened by it. Your father is a good man who has carried the burden of lost love and unknown fatherhood for too long. Bringing that burden into the light may free him to be the husband, father, and king he was always meant to be." The door to the solar burst open suddenly, and King Theodore himself strode into the room, his face showing the strain of hours spent pacing the corridors in growing anxiety. He stopped short when he saw the two women, his wife standing with calm dignity, and the slave girl kneeling with tears streaming down her face, and immediately understood that everything had changed irrevocably. "Isabel," he said quietly, his voice carrying resignation mixed with relief, "what have you done?" "I have done what needed to be done," Queen Isabel replied with quiet strength, her gaze meeting her husband's with unflinching directness. "I have uncovered the truth that you have been struggling with alone, and I have given your daughter back her identity." The words hung in the air between them, simple and profound, changing everything while somehow making the world feel more right than it had in months. King Theodore's knees nearly buckled as he heard his wife speak the truth aloud. For so long he had carried the weight of suspicion and growing certainty in isolation, afraid to voice his beliefs for fear of the destruction they might bring. Now, hearing the confirmation from Isabel's lips, he felt 23 years of suppressed emotion threatening to overwhelm him entirely. "Serafina," he said softly, his voice breaking on her name as he looked at the young woman who was his daughter, his child, his blood. "My daughter." The word seemed to unlock something deep within his chest, and he found himself moving toward her without conscious thought, drawn by instincts that transcended royal protocol and social barriers. Serafina looked up at him through her tears, seeing him now not as the powerful and potentially dangerous king, but as the father she had never known she had. The resemblance between them was unmistakable once acknowledged. The same strong jawline, the same intelligent eyes, the same way of holding their heads when deep in thought. How had no one noticed before? How had they all been so blind to what should have been obvious? "Your Majesty." "Father," she whispered, testing the word on her tongue like a prayer. It felt strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once, this claiming of relationship that changed everything about her place in the world. "I don't understand how this is possible. All these months I've been here, serving in your household, and neither of us knew." "I suspected," Theodore admitted, kneeling beside her in a gesture that would have scandalized the court if witnessed by anyone else. "The letter from the monastery about your mother's death, your appearance, your manner. I began to piece it together, but I was afraid to hope, afraid to believe that fate could be so kind as to bring my lost daughter home to me. His voice carried years of accumulated pain and longing, the grief of a father who had been forced to abandon his child before ever knowing her. Queen Isabel watched this reunion with emotions far more complex than she had expected. Instead of the jealousy and resentment she had feared, she found herself feeling a deep satisfaction at seeing justice finally done, at witnessing the restoration of bonds that should never have been severed. This young woman was not a threat to her marriage, but rather a bridge to healing wounds that had festered in darkness for too long. "What your father is not telling you," Isabel said gently, moving to join them in what had become an intimate family moment, "is that he never forgot your mother. She was the great love of his youth, and losing her broke something in him that I was never able to fully repair." The admission should have been painful, but speaking it aloud felt like liberation rather than defeat. "Isabel," Theodore began, his voice carrying apology and gratitude in equal measure. "No, let me finish," she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "For 20 years I have been a good wife to you, Theodore, and you have been a good husband to me. But I have always known that part of your heart belonged to a memory, to a love that was lost before our marriage began. I accepted that because I understood that duty and love are not always the same thing, and because the love you were able to give me was enough to build a life upon." She turned to address Serafina directly, her manner shifting to something approaching maternal warmth. "But you, child, represent something more than memory. You are the living embodiment of that lost love, but more importantly, you are Theodore's daughter, his blood, his legacy in ways that go beyond political succession. Your place in this family is not a threat to mine, it is a completion of something that was always missing." The three of them remained there in the solar as the afternoon light faded into evening, talking quietly about the past, the present, and the uncertain future that lay ahead. Theodore told Serafina stories about her mother, her intelligence, her courage, her laughter that could light up a room. Isabel shared her own memories of Maria's brief time at court, painting a picture of a woman who had been beloved by all who knew her. "What happens now?" Serafina asked as shadows began to lengthen across the room. "I know I cannot simply continue as a slave now that the truth is known, but what place can I have at court? What life can I build as a bastard daughter acknowledged after 23 years of ignorance?" "You will be legitimized as much as law allows," Theodore said firmly, his voice carrying the authority of absolute royal decree. "You will be granted the title of Lady Serafina, with lands and income appropriate to your status as my daughter. You will take your rightful place at court, and anyone who shows you disrespect will answer to me personally. And more than that," Queen Isabel added with a smile that surprised them all with its genuine warmth, "you will be welcomed into our family not as an outsider or a burden, but as the daughter we never knew we needed. Your half-brothers will have a sister to protect and cherish, and I—" She paused, considering her words carefully. "I will have a daughter who can teach me about the woman your father loved before me, and perhaps help heal old wounds with new understanding." In the months that followed the revelation of Serafina's true parentage, Thornwick Castle underwent a transformation that amazed everyone who witnessed it. The acknowledgement of the king's bastard daughter created initial shock and scandal among the nobility, but the grace with which Queen Isabel handled the situation, and the obvious joy that suffused the royal family, gradually won over even the most skeptical courtiers. Serafina's elevation from slave to acknowledged princess was handled with careful ceremony and deliberate pageantry designed to establish her new status beyond any possible doubt. King Theodore formally recognized her as his daughter before the assembled court, granting her the title of Lady Serafina de Valdoria and endowing her with substantial lands and income. The transformation was so complete that many nobles who had barely noticed her existence as a servant now competed for her attention and favor. But perhaps the most remarkable change was in the relationship between the king and queen themselves. The revelation that had threatened to destroy their marriage instead became the foundation for a deeper understanding than they had ever shared. Queen Isabel's gracious acceptance of her husband's past and her genuine embrace of his newfound daughter earned Theodore's profound gratitude and a renewed appreciation for the woman who had chosen to see opportunity rather than threat in an impossible situation. "I never imagined," Theodore confided to his wife one evening as they walked through the rose garden that had been planted in memory of Maria de Valencia, that acknowledging the past could free us to build a better future. For 20 years I carried guilt and regret like stones in my chest, and now, because of your wisdom and generosity, I feel lighter than I have since I was a young man. Love shared does not diminish, Isabel replied, her hand resting comfortably on his arm as they paused beside the white roses that had been Maria's favorites. Loving Serafina as your daughter does not mean you love our sons any less. Honoring Maria's memory does not diminish the respect and affection we have built together. Some hearts are large enough to hold multiple loves without any one of them suffering for the other's presence. Serafina herself proved to be everything her royal bloodline suggested she should be: intelligent, gracious, politically astute, and possessed of a natural dignity that owed nothing to training and everything to character. Her years of hardship had taught her empathy for those who suffered, while her noble heritage gave her the tools to effect meaningful change in their conditions. She quickly became known throughout the kingdom as an advocate for the powerless, using her position to reform laws regarding slavery and the treatment of servants. "It's remarkable," observed Lord Chancellor Edmund during one of the royal council meetings, "how quickly Lady Serafina has adapted to her new station. One would think she had been raised at court rather than in bondage." His comment reflected the general amazement at how naturally she had assumed her role as a royal daughter. "Blood will tell," King Theodore replied with obvious pride, watching as his daughter presented a proposal for establishing schools for common children. "She carries the best qualities of both her parents, her mother's compassion and intelligence, combined with the strength and determination of the royal line." His voice carried no shame about his past relationship with Maria, only gratitude for the daughter it had produced. The most touching aspect of the family's transformation was the relationship that developed between Queen Isabel and Serafina. What could have been a source of bitter tension instead became a bond of mutual respect and genuine affection. Isabel found in the younger woman a bridge to understanding the great love of her husband's youth, while Serafina discovered in the queen a mother figure who offered wisdom, protection, and unconditional acceptance. "Your mother would be so proud of what you've become," Isabel told Serafina one afternoon as they worked together on plans for a new orphanage. "She was a woman who believed that nobility was defined by character rather than birth, and you have proven that truth in everything you do." "I hope I can honor both her memory and your kindness," Serafina replied, her voice thick with emotion. "You could have seen me as a threat, as evidence of your husband's betrayal, but instead you chose to welcome me as family. That gift of acceptance has meant more to me than any title or inheritance ever could." The three royal sons, princes who had grown up knowing they might someday rule, embraced their half-sister with enthusiasm that surprised many at court. Rather than viewing her as competition for their father's affection or resources, they welcomed the addition of intelligence and perspective she brought to their family dynamics. The youngest prince, barely 16, declared publicly that having a sister had made him understand why other families seemed so much more interesting than his own had been. As Serafina's first year as an acknowledged princess drew to a close, the kingdom had adapted to her presence with remarkable ease. Visiting dignitaries who had heard rumors of scandal and family drama instead found themselves charmed by a royal family that seemed more united and harmonious than many legitimate dynasties. The story of the slave who became a princess, and the queen who chose love over jealousy, spread throughout neighboring kingdoms as an example of how grace and wisdom could transform even the most difficult circumstances. "Do you ever regret it?" Theodore asked his wife on the anniversary of Serafina's recognition, as they stood together on the balcony overlooking the courtyard where their daughter was teaching the younger nobles a new dance she had learned from the common people. "Do you ever wish I had kept the secret buried?" "Never," Isabel replied without hesitation, her eyes bright with genuine happiness as she watched the young woman who had brought such unexpected joy into their lives. Some gifts come disguised as problems, some blessings arrive wrapped in difficulty. Serafina was both, and choosing to unwrap the blessing rather than fear the problem was the wisest decision I have ever made. The story that had begun with forbidden love, hidden shame, and dangerous secrets had transformed into something beautiful and healing. The king who had loved his slave more than his queen discovered that love, when acknowledged and handled with wisdom, could expand rather than divide. The queen who could have been destroyed by jealousy instead found her family enriched by acceptance. And the slave girl who had known nothing but hardship discovered that sometimes the most impossible dreams do come true, especially when they're supported by the love and wisdom of people brave enough to choose hope over fear. In the end, what surprised everyone most was not that the king had fallen in love with a slave, but that the revelation of that love had made everyone involved more noble, more loving, and more truly royal than they had ever been before.